Welcome to the Entrepreneur Podcast, filled with marketing and leadership tips on launching and growing your business with your host, Deanne Mora.
Hey, podcast listeners. In today's episode, I interviewed Judi Smith, who, together with Dr. Tom Smith, is co-founder of the International Clinic of Biological Regeneration, a clinic specializing in leading-edge cell therapy for anti-aging and rejuvenation. I think you'll be fascinated to hear what she has to say, not only about cell therapy, but about how her business has grown and evolved over the past 30 years. Enjoy. I'm here with Judi Smith, the co-founder of the International Clinic of Biological Regeneration. And Judi, you've obviously been an expert in cell therapy for many years. Can you tell me how you got started?
I can. It's a long story. I'll try to make it short. I was a student in the late 60s in college, and I was studying psychology. I became very interested in biochemistry and alternative medicine and things, so I switched majors and I started taking classes in physiology and taking the science track. And one of my professors was Dr. Tom Smith. That's how it happened. And he was very much my senior. He was 27 years older, so but I was completely taken with him. He was brilliant, and anyway, I took every class he offered and so forth. And ultimately, I'll cut the rest of it out, but we were married. And I started traveling with him around the world to study alternative medicine, which he had been doing for quite some time. He had been a medical student in the 50s, again, and he was considerably older than I, and was in a very serious radiation accident, which was considered fatal at the time. It was an X-ray machine that was bulky, and he tried to fix it without getting help, and he was radiated for an excessive period of time. But anyway, traditional medicine held no hope for him, so he started studying, and he was already a resident physician, started studying alternative medicine. And years after that, we stumbled across cell therapy in Europe when he was taking a class in the University of London. And so that's how we got started. There was a doctor, Paul Nahans, who started the therapy, and he had a protege named Peter Steffens. And Dr. Peter Steffens was still alive and practicing in London. So of course, when we were there, my husband wanted to talk with him. And he spent a really good amount of time interning with Dr. Steffens. Actually, it turns out that the elder had passed away, but his son also, Peter Steffens, was running the practice. So Tom became very fascinated with cell therapy, continued his studies at the University of Vienna, and did that for a couple of years, and then we opened our own clinics. That's how we got into it.
That's a great story.
Long story.
You know, and I've been a patient for the last, I think, 20 some odd years
yes,
now, so I can absolutely attest to the benefits of the therapy.
Great.
I love it.
You're a walking billboard.
I am.
We like saying you've had cell therapy
I'm
for
55.
20 years.
I'm proud that I've been able to keep things all going. So Judi, one of the things that I've heard you say that was one of the mission, I guess, of ICBR when you started was really bringing cell therapy to everyone. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I can. That's part B of the story. When Tom was studying with Peter Steffens, or actually interning with him in his office, he was seeing movie stars, he was seeing millionaires, business magnates and everything, because the treatment was extremely expensive. And he knew it was good because he was hearing rave reviews from them, and he was very enthusiastic, but it nevertheless was out of the reach of most people. So when he went to the University of Vienna to study, he really didn't have that in mind, but of course in the course of his study, he was privy to the invoices from the pharmaceutical houses. And I would come and go. So we had a school-age child at the time, so I couldn't stay there all the time, but I was there at that particular time, and I remember he came back to our little apartment. And he said, Judi, this does not have to be and this is in the 80s, it's like $15,000 to $20,000. He said, it does not have to be that. He said, they're paying, Dr. Steffens practiced on Harley Street. The clinic in Switzerland was a castle.
All the overhead,
yeah. The overhead was enormous. Plus, they were dealing with very well-known and recognizable people. So they deserve their privacy like anyone else, but that involved private limousines, private nursing staffs, inpatient. You can see we're all just
very simple surroundings,
exactly.
But it gets the job done.
So we talked, and what we decided to do was to bring it back to the borders of the United States. It was not allowed in the United States, but we could in Mexico, and it turns out here in the Bahamas we could do it as well. So we decided decided to open our own clinics, not try to own anything, not even a modest building, we would pay on a per day basis to use the facilities. We would use the existing staff, I mean, the drivers here, the nurses here, and that sort of thing. And we would minimize expense. To this day, I have a home office. I've never had an office outside my home. We keep everything, the overhead trimmed to the bone, so that we can put all of the money into the cells themselves.
Therapy with the
Exactly. So that was our mission statement from the beginning, was to make this available to, it's still expensive, I understand that. It's not.
But it's not crazy compared to, a lot of treatments that you might have.
Well, over the 40 years I've been doing this, I mean, it certainly is not. We're being, passed up by a lot of really traditional things.
Yeah.
So that's been our passion, was to make it available to, teachers, people, working people.
Everyone who needs to
Exactly.
retain their health.
I was interested in that kind of therapy. It is an alternative therapy designed to keep the immune system peaked, the endocrine system peaked, feel as good as you can, as long as you can, is the goal.
Yeah. So, having been a patient for so long, obviously I know how I feel and, the benefits that it's had for me, but what do you typically see with your patients? What do they experience after their first time, second time?
First time usually is, they feel it, in the sense they have more energy, they sleep better. You certainly, get some benefits in terms of appearance, your skin texture, and that sort of thing. It's really good.
It really is.
And
a little bit vain, but yes.
They'll notice that sort of thing the first time. But then the second time, it's like going from 0 to 60 and then maintaining the speed. Then it's just a maintenance issue. What you notice then after that is the passage of time. I just had 50-year high school reunion, so time passes and you start to see.
And you see the other people who are your age, and you look around and you go,
Yeah, it's a little scary.
It's a little scary.
And aging isn't it? None of us are immortal.
No, of course not.
But
we want to age really gracefully.
Gracefully and slowly. Absolutely. Yeah.
So Judy, can you tell me a little bit more about what people can expect in terms of what's actually in the injections?
Sure. The injections actually have about 6 or 7 components. We're dealing with whole embryo, the whole body. We're dealing with the endocrine system, the immune system, the major organs, and then I like to use, I think we talked a little bit about the HPA axis today. That is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and that is a part of the endocrine system that is responsible for balancing, for homeostasis. It balances the immune function as well as the inflammation cycle, and with everyone's adrenals just maxed out and exhausted, I think that's the biggest complaint I get,
We're also stressed.
So to balance it, and it's the adrenal's job to keep everything in balance, because if you're exposed to anything on a plane or a doorknob, your body is supposed to react with a little inflammation and an immune response. But the adrenal is supposed to shut that down when the threat is gone. If it doesn't, then both the immune function and the inflammation cycle continue to build, and that will ultimately lead to hyperinflammation, which is the root of all evil in terms of disease, and also immune deficiency, or preceding that, you'll get immune overactivity. So we're seeing a whole lot of autoimmune diseases that we haven't seen in this, in that number of people in a long time.
And when you say embryonic, can you talk a little bit more about where these cells come from?
Yeah, absolutely. The cells that I'm using in classic cell therapy, which we call it now because there are some offshoots of it, but classic cell therapy is a animal product, and we use black mountain sheep because that was actually Paul Nahon's preference. Any mammal at that stage of gestation would be fine. They're not rejected until they become species specific. Because if you remember in 9th grade biology where you taught that all men, a long time ago. I know, me too. Way long ago. And you weren't paying attention at the time anyway. But all mammals start the same, and then they differentiate as they develop. Well, they go through stages of organ specific and then to species specific. So the cells that I'm using can be any mammal, but they need to be taken at the specific time before they're at the height of their development before becoming species specific. So we use black mountain sheep. That was classic. That's what Dr. Nahon's used. He preferred them because in his day he was working with food source animals, and so they were the healthiest animal easy to keep well, almost completely disease resistant, cancer resistant. They just have a really heightened immune system. So he used black mountain sheep. And now I could use bovine, I can use porcine, that would be pig or cattle. But I still prefer to stick with sheep because I think you still have that enhanced immune reaction from black mountain sheep. And also, there may be some religious or dietary concerns with the others, particularly porcine. And I know my people very well, usually by the sound of their voice on the phone, but not necessarily, their religion or their preferences. So I don't want to offend anyone. So we stick with sheep.
So how has cell therapy evolved over the years? You've been doing this for how long?
Almost 40 years. We started in 1981.
And how have things changed? What were you doing back then compared to what you're doing today?
The original cells that we used, we were just what we would call post-live cell. When Nahans developed this originally, it was a live cell product, and that means it was taken from the embryo and injected immediately in its raw state. So it had to be done in surgical theater because you would have a small reaction just from the extracellular material. A living cell is putting out waste product, it's taking in nutrients, there's a lot of activity going on. So if you take that in a raw state and inject it, you're going to have a reaction. So this had to be an in-hospital or in-clinic procedure. And a little bit dangerous because anaphylactic shock would be the worst case scenario. Dr. Nahans did that. That was state of the art in the 40s, but he developed a lyophilization process, which is essentially freeze drying. And his goal was to be able to be portable because he had dignitaries from a lot of the World War II dignitaries and statesmen and the Pope and movie stars. He was becoming very popular and he wanted to take it to them. He was, didn't want to be tied down to the operating theater or a pregnant So he developed this process where he could make it portable and then reconstitute it at the time of injection. So we came in just at that point where they were lyophilized, but they were not purified to the point that we use now. So we had to do it over 3 days just because of the quantity and the size of the cells. So lyophilization removes all the fluid, all the water, but it just contracts the cell many times over, but it's still a lot. So to do that much in 1 day would be too much for people. So we did it over 3 days, did that for a few years before the lyophilization process became refined, and we could do it all in 1 day. But that took, we were well into 4 or 5 years before that happened.
Wow. And you've talked about exosomes as being the next big frontier in cell therapy. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
They are indeed. There's so much buzz about exosomes right now. We'll start doing that now at our very next group in January, February. Exosomes are not whole cells. They are called technically vesicles. They are put out by every cell in your body. Let me start out by saying exosomes are the major cell-to-cell communication. You have 3 ways of cells communicating with one another. We always thought there were 2, and now there are 3. And the third turns out to be the most prolific. There's direct neural connection, which is through your nervous system. If you stub your toe and you feel like that's straight up the nerves. There's endocrine communication, where the thyroid or other endocrine hormones are put out and the body picks them up and appropriately reacts. And exosomes. Every cell in your body through your whole life put out thousands of exosomes constantly. And exosomes are little repair kits. They're little RNA packets called vesicles that influence all the cells around them to be like themselves. They're saying, be like me. So whether it's we're using embryonic, obviously, but as you age, you're putting out older vesicles, older exosomes, and that's influenced all the cells around that. It's like a pebble in a pond where the aging process is spreading. Disease spreads the same way. Cancer spreads the same way. You're putting out the little information packs, repair kits, that make the surrounding cells act similarly. So the idea is to flood your system with embryonic exosomes. And this is a post-live birth product. It's human, and it's taken from the placenta and the umbilical cord. So there is no harm to mother or child. In fact, it's a consensual thing, that these are donated. And very well tracked, that they are disease-free, they're genetically tested, the mother's health and so forth has been documented. So this is a way of getting embryonic exosomes into your body that will influence all the cells. It's the research. Turning back time. That's always been the goal, and now it's really for real. they started with research years ago where they knew if they combined two animals, a younger and an older, and combined their circulatory system, that the older animal rejuvenated. And they didn't know what factor it was in the blood that was doing it, but it's all come down to exosomes. And so now they've been isolated. They are provisionally FDA approved, which means you can use them until there's a final judgment, which will come in 2020. But I'm working with the best of the pharmaceutical houses that have every reason to assume they will be approved completely. So we're free to use them now in the States, which is a big change.
That's exciting. And are the cell therapies that you offer, are they compatible with other therapies that people may be taking?
Yeah, very much so. The two in particular, the one I do and the exosomes, are very compatible. I've been doing attending a lot of seminars, talking to a lot of research scientists, and they're very intrigued with what I'm doing because it's almost so old it's new again. A lot of these fellows are younger than when I started, doing this. They always point that out. Thank you. No, I wasn't even born.
You're still looking good, so that's your parents.
Anyway, so they're saying what you're doing is organ specific. It's targeting organs. You can send cells directly to the kidneys, to the lungs, to the heart, as well as the glands that we're talking about. And they say, the exosomes, once you put them in IV, they're like letting kids out of the school for recess. I mean, they all scatter. And so you can't direct them, but they're so very potent, and your body does direct them to a point. I mean, if you have a cut, of course it draws white cells and it draws stem cells and that sort of thing. So there's some direction, but you can't manage it. But the point is to just flood your body with these exosomes. Each milliliter of exosomes has 1 billion exosomes. So the quantity is enormous, but then the quantity you're putting out every day is enormous. So they're injected IV, and another small difference, makes a difference to me in just the protocol, but they are cryogenically frozen, so they have to be maintained frozen until immediately upon use. So that logistically is a little difficult. But otherwise, that is the new frontier. You'll be hearing more and more about exosomes. And I do a general rejuvenation practice. I'm not a doctor, I don't treat disease, but they are being used by physicians who are using them surgically. When they do any kind of surgery, they will use an exosome around the site, and it heals much more quickly, much more easily.
You were mentioning the story of an athlete that was...
Yeah, there was, I met at one of these seminars, I met a fellow podiatrist, and he was treating a world-class athlete, a surfer, a competition surfer. And he had had an injury that wasn't healing, and he was going to require another surgery, and that was going to make him miss a major competition, apparently. And he said, well, we'll use exosomes and see what we can do. Within 2 weeks, he's back on his board. What they thought would be a couple month recovery.
That's
so
amazing.
They are amazing. You'll hear more and more. Google, or whatever you want to do, exosomes and mesenchymal stem cells. MSCs are called mesenchymal stem cells.
Interesting. And if somebody's considering cell therapy, what's a good age to start?
The sooner the better, and not, obviously not as a really young person, teenager or anything, unless there's a medical reason to do it. But for anti-aging purposes, technically, this is not good news. You start aging at about 26 years old. You don't feel it at that point. But that is when, on average, everybody's different, but on average, that's when you stop producing more cells than you're losing. So that's a period of homeostasis in your late 20s. 25 is considered fully mature. And then
it's downhill after that. Well, that's encouraging.
That's why I'm here.
Now, what if you're not 26 and you're a little bit older than 26?
And which is
still okay to start?
Which is typical, because you're not really feeling this until your 30s and 40s. But, ideally somewhere in the late 30s to 40s is fine. Most of my folks don't. I mean, it's just reality. It's expensive. I understand that it is, and you've got a young family, you can't always afford these things. But people in their 50s or 60s are more typical of my people who start the therapy.
But they're no more expensive, honestly, than a lot of the superficial things that people are doing to try to make themselves look good.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of facial treatments and body treatments that people spend a lot of money in. It's not really actually helping them out.
It's not. It's hurting in some ways, because every time you cut, say a facelift or something, you cut a certain amount of circulation and muscle innervation. So it looks good, but it's not good for your skin.
This is
Whereas
good
what
for
I
the
do is,
inside out.
yeah, inside out. And again, it's perfectly compatible. It's not like you have to choose one or the other. But, for overall health and vitality, this is the more natural way to go.
Yeah, sounds like
And we haven't changed our prices. Our mission statement was to keep the prices low, and I don't even remember the last time I raised prices. Other things go up, they do. Travel goes up, the cells have gotten a little more expensive, considerably more expensive. Everything goes up, but I am just loath to increase prices. So, we'll hold it as long as we can, but I don't think I've changed in 10, 15 years. So people have passed me by in terms of money. Yeah, I'm charging a lot more. The exosomes are a good example. I am going to charge as little as I can. So the price of the exosomes is extremely expensive, relatively speaking, and it's completely dependent on how many you get, what it costs. But I'm going to do a therapeutic level and hold the price down to about $6,500, which I know is a lot of money. I'm always cognizant of the money. At least I don't have to travel internationally, which helps a little bit. But anyway, I'm going to keep the price down as low as I can, and see if we can hold it at that for a while. Because there are clinics using exactly the same protocol. I know because I know the pharmaceutical reps, and they sell to the doctors. And what I'm doing for that price, people are charging $10,000 to $18,000 for. But then they've got the overhead I don't have. I don't begrudge them that, but they're in Beverly Hills or somewhere that costs a lot of money.
Well, when you think about investing in your health like that, though, if you add up your deductible on your insurance over a period of time, I mean, easily you could be well over that. So it's just a matter of,
absolutely.
Would you rather be preventative, or would you rather pay to try to fix things later?
Yeah, and any way you look at it, staying well is the preference. You feel better, you look better, you have more energy. Plus, over the long term, you're not going to run into the same. Fingers crossed, everybody's different. I can't make promises that you won't, but for the most part, you'll avoid a lot of the degenerative diseases.
Well, thank you, Judi. You've been very, very
You're
informative, very
welcome.
helpful, and we really do appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Yeah, thank you.